There will be no repair of this. They won't hear your accountability or apology. You did the ultimate sin. You made them feel foolish, look bad, feel hurt. And the catastrophic impact of that kind of injury to a narcissistic person means that there is no fixing it. Let's talk about a little lovely mind F that happens in narcissistic relationships that I have no doubt that more than a few have experienced, but sometimes I try to put things to word here because it helps others who may have had this happen and don't know it's a thing. So we're all aware of the mask on, mask off dynamic of the narcissistic relationship, that they know how to keep it together in front of other people. And that can leave so many people in these relationships not having enough support because the world sees a charming and charismatic person who is generous or helpful or just shiny, but they're not behaving in the mean and cruel way that you're used to enduring when you're with this person, particularly behind closed doors. But here's what we forget is what happens over time is what happens to any of us in these narcissistic relationships. The narcissistic person acclimatizes and almost gets acculturated. They kind of believe their own hype because it does require a fair amount of self-control for them to keep it together in front of other people. So if they are used to being with you a lot, for example, if it's your parent, you're with your parent all the time, or it's a relationship you've been in for a while, like a long-term relationship or like a marriage, their mask slips and they get used to being around you and they stop holding back. And then one day, one of their little mean attacks happens in front of someone else or other people. They don't keep the mask on, basically. And basically now there's a witness to one of their mean-spirited tantrums. I have no doubt this has happened to some of you. And then because other people are watching how they're treating you, someone else may say something. Maybe they say, hey, that wasn't cool, or you aren't being nice to her. Whoa, geez, why are you being so mean? The person observing says something that shows the narcissistic person that their behavior has been spotted. And a narcissistic person does not like that. They don't like that they're being viewed as mean-spirited or cruel or nasty. As we know, when the narcissistic person is unmasked, their shame gets activated and more rage pours out. The narcissistic person needs to be viewed as a great, nice person. Now, I have no doubt that many of you have been here in this particular dynamic. The narcissistic person finally shows their true colors. They stop trying to be on their behavior and they let it rip. Basically, they wound you, but they do it in front of other people, and someone notices. And keep in mind, though, that those narcissistic people have also traditionally had the advantage of the enablers. So the narcissistic person may sometimes show their true colors early in the game in front of other people, but those other people, if they're enablers, may say things like, oh, yeah, that's a lot, but they just had a tough day, or their bark is worse than their bite, or, you know, they didn't mean it. And so that means in those audiences, if you will, the narcissistic person can really sort of abuse in front of those groups without losing any regard from the other people who are making excuses for them. The enablers embolden them. But as I said, as the narcissistic person gets more and more used to abusing you, to wounding you, their censorship muscles kind of go flaccid and they just do it. They do it in front of people, and it may not just be enablers. And they may do it in front of someone who's willing to call them out. So you might wonder what happens then. Do they attack the person who called them out, who viewed their behavior as a problem? Sometimes. Quite often the narcissistic person might. But let's really talk about what they're most likely, almost guaranteed to do. They wound you, and they tell you it was your fault. That they went off on you, and they had reasons for it. You're being unreasonable, stupid, selfish, a bad person, greedy. Other people couldn't see what you were doing, whatever they say, but ultimately that you made them look bad. They do that and they mean it. They will then get doubly angry at you, and they will then criticize and impugn the person who had the audacity to call them out. And heaven forbid, in your case, if that person who made that observation is a source of support for you. The narcissistic person will try and isolate you from that person. But they will do this, I promise you. They will yell at you after wounding you for making them look bad because they felt that they had the right to do what they were doing, and now they feel they're being seen unfairly as a bad person because, of course, they think everything's unfair to them. But this tactic of treating you horribly in front of someone else or in front of other people, getting called out, and then blaming you for their bad treatment of you because they were merely reacting to what they consider to be your awful. Basically, they don't want to be called out. This is something that domestic abusers have always been done. Somebody saying, oh, she was being unreasonable. That's why I had to react like that. And sadly, most people in power have bought this explanation from abusers. For children who endure this dynamic, they slowly learn that other people seeing how their parent is treating them may put them in even more peril. Children are by definition powerless. And over time, that poor child often hopes that nobody does see it because that will protect them. And children then get stuck in these invalidating cycles throughout childhood because the parent actually believes they're in the right. It's a part of the entire complex of gaslighting to blame you for their abuse of you. But it can be so devastating to have that moment of recognition from a third party that the way you're being treated is a problem. Then you might even have a momentary fantasy that the narcissistic person will hear the feedback and then, boom, they might even change, but that tends to go away and you have to be ready for more abuse. It can also build up that sense of hopelessness that's so common in these relationships that even if other people see it, nothing changes. But seeing this dynamic, recognizing that even if they're seen, that they wound you, and even if they're seen, they can really foster that radical acceptance. So it's such an insidious dynamic that the narcissistic person literally wounds you and then acts like it wasn't even a problem. And in fact, this takes us to another dynamic. We've talked about it in other videos, but it's very closely related to this, which is that the narcissistic person deeply, deeply wounds you. And then they have fully regulated themselves. They've let it all out. And after they devastate you, they walk around almost like nothing happened. It's as though they got whatever they had to get off their chest and then some. They, in a strange, sick way, feel relieved now that they've treated you horribly. They don't have empathy. They do feel entitled to it. They don't worry about consequences. In fact, there's research showing that narcissistic people care about rewards, but they don't care so much about punishments. So they'll act any way they want. They feel vindicated in it. They feel entitled to it. They wound you terribly. And after it's done, you're left devastated and they're sort of relaxed and looking great. That can also set you up for those situations where the person looks at the person who's in the narcissistic relationship and saying, why are they always such a mess? And the narcissistic person may look calm and well put together. All of these things together line up to be various elements of narcissistic abuse, but ultimately they're also pieces of gaslighting, things that leave you feeling like there's something wrong with you, and absolutely no accountability for the narcissistic person's behavior. Narcissistic people are very, very, very good liars. Now, they're not as good at lying as psychopaths. Nobody is that good, but they're good. Lying is second nature for narcissistic people because really it's self-preservation for them. It allows them to maintain their grandiose narrative and their sort of idealized depiction of themselves. Because lying serves such an important psychological function for narcissistic people, it's almost reflexive. For a narcissistic person, think of a lie as a scaffold that holds up their entire sense of self. If you try to move the scaffold or dismantle it, the thing that it's holding up, and in this case, it's the entire sense of self that the narcissist has as what a great person they are, for example, it'll all collapse. And that's not a very good feeling for them. All of that brings up all kinds of shame, so they avoid doing that. We all lie sometimes to some degree. Let's face it, all of us lie. Typically, our lies are sort of socially facilitating, maybe protective lies. We tell people they look nice when they don't. We tell them that the dinner they made was delicious when it sucks, that their dog is cute when not so much. Our other option at those times is either silence or hurt feelings. But let's face it, there are lies, and then there are lies. Bigger ticket lies hurt. And they destroy the foundation of a relationship because over time, you don't know what's true anymore, and trust fades, never to come back in the same way. In the absence of truth and trust and honesty, there's absolutely no possibility for a healthy relationship. Now, there can sometimes be confusion between a lie and gaslighting. Gaslighting is a little worse because you can't shift the gaslighter's perspective on the basis of evidence, and gaslighting is meant to dismantle your sanity. Lying, in theory, can be pushed back on with evidence, but that evidence isn't going to work with a narcissistic person. But because that lie, like I said, is basically acting as a scaffold for the narcissistic person's ego and their sense of self and their falsehood of being a good, nice person, that it would collapse if you try to call them out on it. Instead of copping to the lie or owning it, or maybe even just being defensive for a minute, but then ultimately being contrite, all you're going to get from a narcissist, if you call them out on a lie, is rage, rage, and more rage. You may even get little projective twist arounds where you get accused of being the liar. And it turns actually into a gaslighted mess pretty fast. I always view that the lie is sort of the exit ramp, and then the gaslight's where you're going. Now, without being able to call out a lie as a lie, many people wonder, how can a relationship sustain or proceed? Well, I mean, that's a different question, isn't it? This relationship was never a healthy relationship. Narcissistic relationships are never based on respect or trust or mutuality of regard or compassion. So trying to address the lying, while it feels important to you, it isn't going to address the fundamental issues of the relationship. The lying is a symptom of a much bigger problem. The lies make narcissistic relationships, which are already very confusing, even more confusing, because some narcissistic folks lie basically for sport. They lie about absolutely inconsequential things like where they got the bagels that morning. I think some of it may be sort of that inherent oppositionality that is a part of all narcissism, a sort of tiny rebellion, a way of maintaining something that feels like dominance or power. Many narcissistic folks learned to lie pretty skillfully at a pretty young age. Many would lie in the name of grandiosity, telling small lies that became bigger lies to get validation or admiration or to generate envy. And over time, the lying almost becomes sort of a lifestyle and simply a part of who they are. While that full point deceit and lying that cuts through everything is more of a pattern of lying that we tend to see in psychopathy more than in narcissism. For example, lying, using different identities, lying about their families, lying about their histories, about their jobs, about their names. And the lying in psychopathy is much more consistent with parasitic and exploitative lifestyles. In narcissism, the lying appears to be much more about getting admiration, maintaining a grandiose sense of self, and an image of perfectionism, and maintaining a false narrative. So many people, when they really catch a narcissist in a lie, they have the evidence, they have the bank statement, they have the photo, the video, the text. They view it like a smoking gun. They're sort of Perry Mason day in court kind of thing. Like they've got the evidence. They think that they have the aha moment against the narcissist. Unfortunately, even with all of the evidence in the world, it will always devolve into something abusive and mean and awful and gaslighty. The evidence doesn't help, and all of that ickiness can make it all feel even worse. There are times when there is nowhere for the narcissistic person to hide when there is a lie. They may start with rage, then throw in some projection, toss on some gaslighting, and then there may even be a moment of defeat and deflation when they're caught in a lie. That doesn't often or always, certainly doesn't always happen. It doesn't even often happen. Too often, the other person in the narcissistic relationship is so frightened by the rage or so trauma bonded or even struggle with their own abandonment issues that there is that tendency that we often see in narcissistic relationships to appease or apologize or just try to put the episode behind them before the narcissist is actually pushed to that point where they might have to own up to the lie. But lots of folks wonder, when I catch them in a lie, what should I do? You have likely suspected and experienced them lying to you for a very long time. And when you have the proof, at a minimum, it may not change them, but it could be a way to ungaslight yourself. But trust me when I tell you, you're not going to get an aha moment and an apology. You are more likely to get denial and more lies. Ultimately, when you catch them in a lie, and if you find yourself remaining in the relationship, the best you can realize is that you are in a relationship with a liar. And you, as a result, you have to hear most of what they're saying with a grain of salt. They won't come clean. And it's on you to make a choice on how to proceed with someone where you can't believe what's coming out of their mouth. But if you feel that you need to confront them, there is no way that you're ever going to lead them to ownership and accountability. But I understand that you want to face them down on their lie. They're going to rage and gaslight and accuse. And you know what? Some people are okay with that. They just want the narcissist to know that they know, like, I see you. And for some folks who intend to stay in these narcissistic relationships, let's face it, the narcissistic person isn't delusional. They know you know their game. And you knowing gives you a little bit of power. But it does mean that you can't let yourself get lulled by their apologies and their future faking. If you stay from that unenviable position of not being able to trust. And that is at best a deeply superficial relationship, which unfortunately over time may not be good for you. Being in the presence of deceit is really being in the presence of something toxic. Over time, when you can't trust someone, really, what is the point? The very people, these narcissistic folks who are literally like bulls in a china shop when it comes to their relationships, may actually be far more fragile around abandonment. So let's take apart, what is that about? Foremost, it's about attachment. Narcissism is a personality style which is very multi-determined, and we've taken that on in many other videos. There's no singular path to narcissism, and the different backstories can result in narcissistic people that look different kinds of ways. Now, sometimes what we do know is that the more chaotic, neglectful childhood backstories that result in narcissism tend to land more and look like vulnerable narcissism. The overly indulgent, emotionally available, no limits, entitled parents and childhoods, those will slightly more often beget the more grandiose ones. But no matter what the path, attachment issues appear to belie the evolution of narcissism and then the subsequent abandonment issues. Most narcissistic folks are anxiously attached, though there is also some overlap with avoidant attachment. Anxious attachments are associated with this idea that a person doesn't do well with separation. They're anxious when they're apart from a primary person in their life and can get angry at the time of reunion, sort of feeling angry that they were ever left in the first place. For folks with anxious attachments, separations and the endings of relationships are experienced as really deep wounds that are harder for them to get past. The other element that makes abandonment such an issue in narcissistic personalities is their need for control. This means that a narcissistic person is willing to end a relationship on their own terms, but they don't like being left. The control is once again a sort of grandiose defense that allows the vulnerable parts of them to sort of be buffered or protected. So the control means that they control the narrative and nobody really gets to leave. So if someone does leave, there is a cascade of "how dare you" sort of rage. Then there are optics. Narcissistic people care what things look like. They may do shady things in private, but don't like it when things don't look what they think is right in public. Because if they don't look great in public, that affects them getting validation. So as a result, people who are narcissistic will do things like continue to mistreat a spouse and stay in the marriage for show, cheat in private, and then be enraged if someone leaves them because now things don't look so good if they don't have sort of the marriage, the Christmas card, the picture, all of that. And all of this comes together under the big bow of lack of self-awareness and fear of vulnerability. To speak about fears, to do the work of addressing their own shame, to be more clear on how childhood attachment issues and other past family stuff may have impacted them, that self-awareness can then be what brings a person into their adult self and not be pulled around by the nose of insecurity, fragility, and fear. It's damn near impossible for narcissistic folks to plug into their vulnerability because it feels cataclysmic to them, and they will rage and lash out at anyone who pings or evokes that vulnerability and that shame in them. This is why narcissism as a personality style is so complex in adult relationships. There is the little child in the narcissist that desperately needs attention. There's the wannabe superhero that has to be the boss and in control all the time to keep the insecurity under control. There is that internal publicist that needs everything to look right. And there is an utter lack of self-examination or clarity. People are often surprised at the depth of a narcissistic person's response to someone ending a relationship with them. And it's not just romantic relationships. It can be leaving a job or ending a business partnership. It can be distancing or ending a friendship or ending a relationship with a family member. In many ways, the silent agreement we unfortunately craft with narcissistic people is that we're supposed to unquestioningly put up with their invalidation and never leave. Issues like post-separation abuse, the escalated harassment we see when somebody breaks up from a narcissistic person, the stalking, that they can't let go behavior after a breakup, all of that's a manifestation of these abandonment issues that completely go sort of full tilt. So too are passive-aggressive social media campaigns against someone, smear campaigns after the relationship ends, and petty behavior that can persist for years. Folks who decide to cut off narcissistic relationships have the sense it will be hard, but most people are surprised at how hard it is. And when you account for what maybe your own struggles with anxious attachment are and throw that into the mix, it's a wonder that anyone ever gets out of these relationships. But odds are their abandonment issues are worse than yours, so don't let that tough person exterior throw you off. A narcissistic parent catches you in a lie about a party or a family get-together that you were having and you don't invite them. And you pretended like it wasn't happening. A partner cheats on a narcissistic partner. A group of friends start a separate group chat about the narcissistic friend that's in their friend group, and that narcissistic friend finds it and reads it. A group of folks in a new startup business kind of thing slowly plot a way to squeeze the narcissistic person out of the business and do it on their own. And by the time the narcissistic person has found out, the new business gets launched and the narcissistic person is forced out despite having had some good ideas and offered up some financial backing. You may wonder, does the narcissistic person get hurt when they're betrayed? What happens? Yeah, they do get hurt. It would be unfair to say otherwise, because even though the love they may have or the way they show up in a relationship and their behavior, it's not always nice, and it may even be sort of part of the catalyst for the betrayal. For example, the friends may have had it with the narcissistic friend, but they know that anytime they try to tell the narcissistic friend her behavior is awful, they get that same victimized tantrum, but they just wanted a place to talk about it amongst themselves. Or the family member that didn't include the narcissistic parent in the get-together wanted one drama-free get-together on a meaningful day. Or the person who cheats on the narcissistic partner may say, hey, listen, I know cheating is wrong. This marriage has been dead in the water for a long time, but I don't want to get divorced because of all the custody drama, which will come. So yeah, I did something I shouldn't have, and I did it to feel good, but it was wrong. Or the colleagues who knew the narcissistic person would blow up the business, so they figure out a way to get them out before that could happen, right? I'm not saying those things are right, but I'm saying that those could often be the circumstances. Even listening to this, you may think, is it a betrayal if someone engaged in this behavior to survive in a toxic relationship? And the answer to that is yes, it was a breach of trust. It was a violation of the rules. You may be thinking, oh, come on, Dr. Ramani, they've done it to me before. They cheated on me. They've had get-togethers that they lied about without me. They have gossiped about me. They have screwed me in a business deal before. Yes, and that was a betrayal too. And sometimes their betrayal wasn't necessarily tit for tat. So you may cheat on them and they never cheated on you, but they have spent the last 10 years gaslighting, manipulating, insulting, menacing, and financially controlling you. Betrayals aren't about equivalences, and each betrayal is a separate event, okay? So this video is really about what happens to the narcissistic person when they are betrayed, because people wonder about this. The first question is, are they hurt? And I suppose the answer is, in their fashion, yes. They believed in whatever this relationship with you is, whether it was a family relationship, romantic, friend, and that trust got breached. So yes, whatever that means to them, it might have hurt their feelings. But then, pretty quickly, it takes a different turn, because hurt, which feels vulnerable, pivots into an ego injury. And listen, we all people get hurt when we are betrayed. And frankly, all of our egos get bruised when we're betrayed. We feel foolish, we feel played, ridiculous, humiliated. However, the healthier a person is, the more that the emotional hurt takes primacy over their ego being bruised. In a narcissistic person, that gets flipped. And the vulnerability of the feeling hurt fuels a volcanic, and I do mean volcanic, rage. Because the betrayal for a narcissistic person is a moment when their deep insecurity and shame narrative are activated big time. And when that happens, listen, wars have been started over these betrayal moments. If the narcissistic person just stayed in the vulnerable moment of hurt, then repair could happen. But that's not how this personality style works. Because the narcissistic hurt in the wake of betrayal turns into unfettered rage so quickly, we may not even fully register that they were hurt. And frankly, there isn't much that can be done at that point. You know how defending, explaining, and engaging don't work when you are even in the not betrayed times in the relationship. It sure as hell isn't going to work now. There is no version of you saying, hey, now we're even, right? I shouldn't have been hanging with that guy at work, and you shouldn't have cheated on me a few years ago. But let's just move forward and the slate is clean. There is no version of you saying, you have brought chaos to every family gathering, and we wanted Mary's return from her long trip to be peaceful. There is no version of you saying, hey, listen, we didn't want to just sort of like kick you out and not invite you to stuff, but you were so malicious that we needed a group text to just cope with you since you never listen to us. You don't seem to see how you affect other people. Ultimately, it can feel that betrayal is the only way to stay in contact with the narcissistic person. And that is a tricky turn in the road, because you are now in the biggest catch-22 of all. You either feel guilty or scared about the ramifications of leaving, and then the survival behaviors, having the party, for example, without them and not telling them, or having the overly friendly get-togethers with the coworker. These things are also bringing up guilt and fear. And more than a few people over the years of me doing this have said to me that I betrayed them. I was as bad as them. Ultimately, I cheated too, or I was secretive, or I did bad things. And that betrayal you engage in, it can stop people, you, from seeing clearly the patterns, and then you get stuck in these toxic cycles for years. Some of you may think, if I do these betray things because I think the narcissistic person is unreasonable, is that really betrayal? Sadly, I'd argue, yes, it still is. And this is why when we can get out, it's cleaner. The reason these relationships get messier and messier over time is that we're trying to survive within an impossible situation. It's almost inevitable that someone will betray a narcissist if the relationship lasts long enough. When a narcissistic person is betrayed, it can feel like mythological Mount Olympus gods kind of vindictiveness. In fact, if you have already been betrayed by the narcissistic person and stayed in the relationship, you may be startled by the difference in standards and in their reactions, and frankly, in the punishments. You, in the face of you betraying them, may be faced with rage, smear campaigns, enduring them posting all kinds of contorted social media posts that are clearly about you, passive aggression, months of silent treatments, and an epic level of victimhood. In some cases, the narcissistic person may be the one who decides to go no contact or end the relationship with you, and be very vindictive in how they approach the breakup. For example, an even messier divorce than you were initially concerned about. However, in some cases, especially with vulnerable narcissistic folks, you may see the betrayal translate into what looks like an irritable depression. They may become very withdrawn, sad, victimized, maybe even frankly depressed, and that, frankly, can feel worse than the rage. There is a difference when a person who does have empathy, but is trying to survive and not end all contact in a narcissistic relationship, is doing this betraying. And obviously the betrayal that happens by a narcissistic person. Qualitatively, there is a difference. Often the betrayal by, I'm going to say the not narcissistic person is not persistent. It's often a one-off. But the non-narcissistic person is not gaslighting and manipulating and all the rest of it. Whereas the ongoing emotional abuse of the narcissistic relationship is often a daily event. The literal not being seen or experienced as a separate human being. But ultimately, big or small, narcissistic people can and do get betrayed. Usually, this will change the relationship forever. Healthy relationships actually can repair and often do repair after betrayal. They may still end, but the honest making of amends and accountability can allow growth and healing on both sides. That's not going to happen in a narcissistic relationship. The ego injury, the rage, it can play on an existing suspicious, almost paranoia that bolsters the theory that the narcissistic person has that everyone is out to get them. This video is not about the narcissistic person who perceives betrayal when it's not them, when it's not there. For example, you tell them that you're going out to dinner with an old friend. You even invite them to join you for that dinner, and they know it's happening, but then they don't want to go because they're being grumpy, and then they say you're betraying them by still going. Okay, it's not the misperception thing. This video is about when it really is a betrayal. Because it happens, and it happens more often than you think. People are human beings. However, there will be no repair of this. They won't hear your accountability or apology. You did the ultimate sin. You made them feel foolish, look bad, feel hurt. And the catastrophic impact of that kind of injury to a narcissistic person means that there is no fixing it. Also keep in mind that if it happens and they do stay in it, you'll be punished for it for the rest of your life. Now listen, most of us don't come out of betrayal unscathed, and we may no longer trust people for a long time or ourselves. We may remain angry and never forgive the betrayer. All of this is multiplied when the betrayer is not accountable or just simply willing to cop to what they did and that it hurt us. The sting of the betrayal may still be there, but we don't feel crazy if someone owns up to, yeah, I did that and it wasn't okay. For many of us, after we are betrayed, even the more messed up narcissistic betrayal, that does leave us feeling insane. We don't devote our lives to being angry. We go through a process of grief. We have a different relationship with trust, but we heal and we move forward. We may even be able to maintain a relationship with the narcissistic person and not rage at them, but perhaps trust them less. That's not the case for the narcissistic person if they're betrayed, who will likely never move forward from this, whether it's a lifetime revenge or them just cutting you off. This is a delicate issue and a hard one to take on in a video because some of you may be thinking, well, I don't forgive them. Isn't that me holding a grudge after they betrayed you? No. Not forgiving them often happens on the heels of repeated betrayals, not just one. Repeated betrayals that left you feeling unsafe in the world, not just being left off a party invite. Betrayals that they were never accountable for. Betrayals that didn't stop. Betrayals that you begged them to explain and that they blamed you for. That's the part you're not forgiving. And despite the narcissistic person feeling entitled to forgiveness, they aren't going to give it to you if you betray them. And even if they pretend to, maybe for optics, you will know that you are forever going to have to wear the albatross of shame around your neck, the scarlet A in perpetuity, for having betrayed them. Then there is one last twist to this. Many survivors do mistake thinking bad thoughts or having certain kinds of wishes, like, I hope their plane gets delayed by 24 hours and they can't make it for dinner. I hope they aren't home when I get there. I can't stand them and I don't want to see them. Some people think that that's a betrayal. No, a thought is not a betrayal. My personal take, and I'm not the betrayal police, but my personal take is that it becomes a betrayal when it turns into behavior. Daydreaming about how life could be different with a loving, empathic, kind spouse, or at least getting rid of this one, is not betrayal. Wishing your mother gets the flu so she can't spoil your kid's birthday party, that's not betrayal. So don't do that to yourself. Betrayal of a narcissistic person happens, and when it does, and should they find out, be prepared for a 9.0 earthquake, a Category 5 storm, and something that can take you into a dark place of more guilt, confusion, self-blame, and shame. It's a bit like Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. He had to endure his liver being pecked out by an eagle every day for eternity. It would grow back at night, and he would face the torment again, day after day, because he pissed off the dudes in power. It will be a Promethean fate that awaits anyone who runs afoul of or betrays a narcissist. And your empathy will only fuel your guilt and your repentance. But as for them, their hurt turns into vengeance so fast that it's really hard to clock where the hurt ends and the vindictiveness begins. I suppose the best path forward is no one's betraying anyone, but that's not how people work. But be careful, like I said, lest you end up with that Promethean fate. Thanks again.